Jar Oil. The company have filling stations across the country, and our rates are relatively cheaper than anyone else across the country. Jar Oil is the biggest producer and distributor of cement in the country with the most competitive prices in the market.
Excellent jam, Mr. Wave.
Yo, apply. Yo, luta do dede. Luta munulo jel moto nga andil mahalis. Hello?
Busel mo fine.
What?
Busel mo fine.
Oh, yes!
Wave Axina Gambia. Deposit and withdraw money, pay bills, and buy mobile credit without fees. Transfer money wherever in the country for only 1% fee. At Wave. Busel mo fine? Wave. Your money is yours.
1st of July 2025, and on West Coast Radio now is Coffee Time with me, Peter Gomez. Now, according to the International Center for Transitional Justice, historically, the experiences of women and victims of gender-based violations have not been adequately addressed by transitional justice processes, nor have women had sufficient representation or opportunities for participation within accountability, acknowledgement, and reform measures. This has led to serious flaws in even those transitional justice efforts that can otherwise be considered relative successes. These shortcomings include underreporting of certain violations, policies and procedures that make it difficult for women to participate in transitional justice processes or access benefits. That's according to the ICTJ, International Center for Transitional Justice, as I just said. Now, since 2017, the Gambia has been engaged in a transitional justice process. Victims of the exiled former dictator, Yahya Jammeh's 22-year reign of terror, supported by international as well as local NGOs like the Women in Liberation and Leadership, or WIL, have been doing all they can in the last 8 years to address the dictatorship's legacy. Now, I cited WIL in particular because its founder and CEO, Fatou Baldeh, is sitting right in front of me, ready to talk about something that means a lot to her: sexual and gender-based violence. Now, if you visit her organization's website, it will tell you that Fatou holds an MSc in Sexual and Reproductive Health and a BSc in Health and Psychology from the UK. She has extensive experience in the area of gender justice and advocacy for the rights of women, girls, and marginalized communities both in the UK and the Gambia. In recognition of her work with migrant communities and women who have experienced abuse in the UK, Her Majesty, the late Queen Elizabeth II, honored Fatou with an MBE. In 2018, Fatou moved back home and founded Women in Liberation and Leadership in the Gambia. That's WIL. She is a survivor of female genital mutilation and wants to eradicate all forms of abuse against women. Between 2024 and 2025, Fatou received multiple prestigious global accolades. We'll look at some of these later. But in formally welcoming Fatou to Coffee Time, I would like to announce that the conversation initiated by the Women in Liberation and Leadership WIL is made possible through the generous support of UNDP Gambia and OHCHR with funding from the UN Peace Building Fund. Fatou, welcome back to Coffee Time with Peter Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Thank you for having me again.
It was not so long ago that you were here.
Indeed.
And you got a very good response to that conversation. I hope we will have the same this time.
Indeed.
So, some of the last 7 years for us of your activity in the Gambia since coming back from the UK, thanks to the exit of the former dictator.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. In 2018, I moved back home after staying and studying in the UK for many years and gaining both academic and professional experience. Just like many Gambians, after the end of the dictatorship, we all wanted to come back and contribute and rebuild our country in either way that we could. So that was my motivation of coming back and using my experience on gender and reproductive health. I founded the organization WILL.
I'm surprised that, you would be engaged in, FGM work in the UK. I mean, the UK is one place you wouldn't ordinarily associate with FGM.
Actually, the UK has a high number of people from migrant communities where FGM is practiced. So across the UK, you find Gambians, you find people from East Africa like Somalia, which have very high prevalence of FGM. So because of globalization and migration, you find issues that affecting women in Africa, because they live in these European countries, they also experience the consequences, for example, of FGM, but also they may have children who are at risk of the practice.
Mm-hmm. And I know the focus, usually when we talk about gender-based violence is usually, on the sexual aspect of it. But is that the only abuse, that can take place in, relationships?
No, absolutely not. In fact, when you look at relationship, let's take domestic violence, for example. There is physical violence, there is sexual violence to it, there is emotional violence, there is financial violence as well. So it's a spectrum. It encompasses different forms of violations. But of course, the sexual violence is also under the broader umbrella of gender-based violence.
Absolutely. And I just want us to spend a bit of time maybe looking at these other, violences,
yes,
incidents of violence that can take place in a relationship, but they don't have the kind of focus,
yes,
sexual violence, is given, especially FGM.
Yeah. Actually, I think...
You spoke about what? Financial violence? I mean...
Yes, economic yes. So, for example, you'll find in some relationships where a woman who is in the relationship is not economically strong and entirely depend on their husbands. For example, it may be that the husband is not physically abusing the wife, but they can control the wife through financial means. For example, saying, if you don't do this, I will not give you money for fish money, or that's always out there.
But in a society where the man is, expected to provide everything for the woman, I mean, that's out of order, isn't it?
Yeah, but the reality is, really, in Gambia, we can't say that men are providing everything for women.
That's unfair. I'm providing for my woman.
Yes, of course. I'm saying generally.
Yeah.
But we can also say that women are equally providing in the households. One manifestation I always say is when you leave your house in the morning, from dawn, you see women carrying buckets, carrying stuff, going to the market, selling. Those women are also contributing in their households as well. But I think the narrative has always been in our society is that the man provide and the woman is the wife who stays at home. Okay. But in reality, I think they both complement each other in most homes.
So that's economic.
Yes.
What other form of violence exists?
Yes,
can exist?
Yes,
in a
domestic violence also include physical violence, wife battering. We see, repeated cases of husbands beating their wives. But also, I have to acknowledge that domestic violence also affects men, although it disproportionately affects women. But men can also be victims of domestic violence. But because, again, the nature of our society and how men will be perceived if they came forward that they are being abused by their wives, that also silence a lot of men from sharing experiences of violence, domestic violence. Yeah.
Okay. Any other forms of violence before we, zone in on the
sexual? Emotional violence, like where you'll find in a relationship, maybe there is no physical violence present, but they would use words against each other. A husband could be using very negative words towards their wives and vice versa. So there are all these different forms of violations that could affect a couple.
Okay. All right. Well, and WILL is active in all these areas of, gender-based violence.
Yes, we work on the different forms of gender-based violence, including sexual violence, but also, as you know, we work very much on issues around female genital mutilation as well as a form of gender-based violence. So our work is quite broad. and we cover all those areas.
All right. Give us a greater understanding of the structure of WIL.
So WIL is a women-led organization. I founded the organization. Presently, we have 8 young women that work with me. Our work is very much centered around community engagement. We believe that in order for us to have impact in addressing any form of gender-based violence, it has to come from within. Usually we are having these conversations here, but our work is more around how do we take it to our homes from the household level, because we are all, no one is born violent. We learn violence. We learn it as we grow. So our work is going into communities and trying to shift those norms and beliefs that actually contribute to the continuation of violence within our communities. So a lot of conversations around that at the community level, but of course we advocate at the policy level too, to make sure that there are laws put in place to protect women and any vulnerable person. We also, in addition to the laws, of course, we advocate for the services to be available. So, for example, if we talk about gender-based violence or we talk about domestic violence, and you go to a community, you've educated women, you've empowered women, now they recognize what violence is. And if that happened to them, they now come to you and say, okay, I now realize what's happening at home is not correct, and I shouldn't be going through this. I need to leave that relationship. In this country, the challenge we have, when women come forward, we don't have places to take them. Even we've had incidents of for example, sexual violence where it could involve a minor, for example, where they are being abused within their own homes. In some of these cases, there are no structures put in place to support those families that child or that person who is being abused is taking out of that situation. So our work, again, goes beyond just advocating at the community level, but also promoting that these holistic services are available for survivors when they come forward. And
if these services were to be made available, would you rather they were made available to WIL or a completely different sector or area?
I think it can be broad. It can come under the government. So for example, we have a shelter now, the government run shelter, but that's not enough. We need more shelters. The government need to provide more shelters for victims, children or women or anybody for that matter. They should be provided that, but also financial support. In other countries, you have support that is available. So for most women who are in an abusive relationship, the reason they will not leave, they would tell you, if I leave, where do I take my family? Where do I live? Who is going to pay for my child's school fees? And all those factors.
They could leave the child or children with the husband, surely.
Yes, but if they are abusive as well, this is why women don't leave abusive relationships, because if they have children within that setting, because what we need to understand as a nation is that when a man abuses a wife, you are setting an example for your son that this is acceptable, but you are also, if you have a daughter, setting that example, raising that bar for your daughter that it is acceptable for you to be beaten up by a man. So this is why even within the home, it's very important that especially children do not see violence in such environments.
Okay. And this one shelter, I mean, how would you rate the facilities at it, this government-run shelter?
There are many challenges with the shelter. I think, firstly, when you have a shelter, it's not supposed to be permanent. Women, yes, you can accommodate them temporarily and until you find long-term support. Unfortunately, here, one of the challenges that we have is that when people go into this shelter, there are no other like we don't have housing facilities where you could say you can apply for a housing where a woman can go in and the state can support them. That's one. But also the shelter is not big enough to accommodate everybody that is there. So there are those challenges. It's also not decentralized. We have one, I think, here in the Greater Banjul area and one in Baldeh.
Oh, okay. So,
yes.
So there's more than one.
Yes. There's one in Baldeh. I don't know how operational it is, but we need more than 2 shelters, operating shelters in a country.
All right, we are talking to Fatou Baldeh, the founder and Chief Executive of the Women in Liberation and Leadership, or WIL. Let's talk about your work with the Gambia's Transitional Justice Program or process. I mean, how are you working with it, and what are you looking for on behalf of the people you are campaigning?
Yeah. So WIL has been working on the TJ process since 2018, since we were established. Our focus has mostly been around promoting victim-centered approaches throughout the process and victims' participation, which is core in any successful transitional justice process. So our work has centered around, again, making sure communities, so you will know that the TRRC, for example, which is a component of the transitional justice process, was centered in this area where victims went to the TRRC to give statements, to testify. WIL's role has been from the onset going into communities. We know that there are certain communities that had wide violations. So, for example, if you look at Jambur, where they had the witch hunt, if you look at some communities in Fonyi, like Sinted, they had wide violations. The same in North Bank. So our work has been going into those communities and explaining to communities, not just the victims. The victims are important, but everybody, because it should be meaningful participation. We work with everybody to sensitize on how they can participate in the TRRC process. And through that, our interventions very much focus on encouraging women to take part in the process, because if the TRRC in their final report in fact acknowledge that they struggle to have women to come forward and participate in the process. So our work has been through that, but also advocating directly with when the Truth Commission was ongoing, through the Secretariat, to make conducive environment for women and people from rural communities to participate in the process, because we know that the violations were widespread. It's not that people in the Combo or Greater Banjul were the only victims. So we wanted to make sure participation was meaningful, but also encourage measures. So, for example, we advocated not just WIL, civil society organization, particularly women-led organization. We came together and advocated for a gender unit to be established within the TRRC, with staff who are conscious and aware of the challenges that women may face in participation. So we also encourage the provision of psychosocial support to victims. We also encourage for women or victims of sexual violence to participate off camera, so that their identities were also not exposed, to give people options, questioning of whether victims of sexual violence are telling truth, whereas I didn't see that question being asked on other violations. So for the TRRC to initiate that off camera hearing, it was so important, because without it, I don't think we would have had many victims of sexual violence coming forward.
Let's talk about post-TRRC. What has happened since the report came out and, bared all the hideous crimes that happened, especially to women?
Yes. So one thing I appreciate about the TRRC report and recommendations, particularly on sexual violence, is that it recognized that SGBV, one, was widespread during the authoritarian rule. It happened within state institutions, but it also acknowledged the presence of SGBV within the wider context of Gambian society and the challenges that women face to report cases of SGBV. The TRRC report again highlighted that the Jammeh regime created an environment of impunity around SGBV to an extent that women feared to go to any institution to report SGBV cases, because again the report indicated that most sexual violence cases occurred within state institutions like prisons, like detentions. So that environment that it created, we are still feeling the legacy of that. You would see that, you'll agree with me, most of the crimes that the TRRC documented during Jammeh's time, we are talking about it as in history, except SGBV. SGBV continues today. Every other day we are seeing hideous, serious SGBV incidents within our homes, within our society, that are being reported in the media. So that has been a big eye-opening for us. And one thing again that I appreciate about the TRRC recommendations, especially around SGBV, they go beyond recommending just prosecutions, because they've recognized that this is embedded within our society. And in that regard, they've recommended for civil society organizations to also support the process by going into our communities and having conversations, raising awareness on the incidence of SGBV, trying to shift social norms, gender norms that actually create the atmosphere to make it possible for women to be abused without consequences. So this is where Will comes in. We work closely with the Ministry of Justice, for example, the post-TRRC unit, to advocate at the community level. We continue to support victims of SGBV, direct victims, but also recognizing that beyond providing that support, beyond advocating for prosecutions, how do we take these messages back home in our households and continue the conversation and discourage the occurrence of SGBV everywhere within the communities.
Every cloud, they say, has a silver lining. If you take COVID-19, for instance, what it has done is it has helped us make meetings easier.
Yes.
Somebody can sit in the US now, another in Mongolia, somewhere else, and then we go on digital platforms and meet. What's been the silver lining of the TRRC and all these revelations that were made there?
Yeah. One thing again that the silver lining for me in relation to SGBV in particular is that I believe that the issue of SGBV was always like a taboo within Gambian society. The TRRC revealed the extent of SGBV within Gambian society.
Yes.
I also think that the TRRC empowered Gambian women to speak up. I don't know if it's because of the presence of social media, but women are reporting more cases of SGBV. You are seeing women coming out and reporting cases of rape. Yes, there still remain the stigma, the backlash, where when women speak, they are not believed. But we have opened that Pandora box where, as a society, we are finally looking in and acknowledging this as an issue and looking for solutions. And I think it has broken that culture of silence around SGBV, and it's a momentum that we should take advantage of. We certainly at Will are taking advantage of the vehicle of transitional justice to open these conversations, like today coming here and talking about issues of SGBV live on the radio that people can listen to. And that's what this transitional justice process has provided Gambian. And again, with the TRRC report, it goes beyond, as I said, recommending for prosecutions. But what TJ recommendations can do is to improve the standard of living of women. How can we use, for example, when we're talking about prosecuting Jammeh-era crimes, how can we use that atmosphere to improve? Because right now we are struggling with prosecuting, successful prosecutions of SGBV cases because of a lot of issues, be it lack of capacity, be it issues around prejudice within the judiciary, be it within our society, the stigma, because sometimes we'll have a case, you go to court, and in the middle, the family will withdraw the case because they fear stigma and discrimination, but also because the process is taking too long and they no longer cannot bear the prolonged weight of what's happening. So we are hoping that through this accountability processes that we are taking on, it will improve our institutions in a sense that it will facilitate better access to legal support, better access to justice for women and girls in this country.
Excellent jam, Suway.
Yo, apply. Yo, luta do de de. Luta mo nulo jël moto nga andil ma xaalis. Hello? Ano lay waxal?
Bisul mu fine.
What?
Bisul mu fine.
Oh, yes!
Wave Accent Gambia. Deposit and withdraw money, pay bills, and buy mobile credit without fees. Transfer money wherever in the country for only 1% fee. Ak Wave. Bustle mu fine? Wave. Your money is yours.
So you have a feeling we are talking more about gender-based violence, especially from a sexual point of view. But what about the men? Is it are men involved, and how qualitative, is the discussion of men?
Oh, of course, absolutely. We cannot end gender-based violence if men are not included. In fact, part of the work that we do at Will, we have a project where we call the attire chats, where we go into communities and have conversations with young men. Because I think for a long time, we've considered men more as abusers rather than working with men to see how can we change the mindsets, how can we change those social norms or negative masculinities that promote violence against women. So our conversations with men and boys is to talk about gender-based violence, but also denormalize. Because in most, you will see even at home, when a boy does something, we would say, oh, dombu gurla, boy la, this is how boys behave. We need to start from changing those conversations. Because as I said also, as the TRRC also unveiled, SGBV also affected men within detentions. It wasn't just women. Yes, it disproportionately affected women. But we know that Jammeh also used SGBV to punish his opponents and people that were under detention and to humiliate them. And of course, it's been a struggle for a lot of those men to come forward and share those violations, because again, masculinity is very much tied to men and their sexuality. So we know that there are many men also who were victims of SGBV, but again, because of that fear, it hasn't really come out. So the conversations has to include everyone, not just women. For us to end any form of gender-based violence, we need to bring in everyone on board.
I'm still trying to, get an idea, a sense of when men talk about, SGBV, what are they saying? It's one thing for women to engage men. Okay, that's you coming to us and talking to us about, an experience that is, painful to you. But, at the end of the day, you're simply saying to us, stop doing this to us. So what are men saying? When men discuss SGBV, are they condemning it? Are they making declarations of intent to join you in the fight against, SGBV?
Absolutely. There are so many men out there who support our work in their communities. We have male ambassadors at the community level who promote our work, but also discourage by talking to their peers, because we think that that's very influential when a young man takes that decision, but also encourages his friends to also follow that and discourage gender-based violence within their communities. However, often what we see is that victim blaming, because we as a society, when we talk about sexual violence, in my community engagement, one of the things that always comes up, men would always tell you, if you talk about sexual violence, there must have been something that the woman did. That's what men would say in most cases. In fact, we do hear this from women as well, where they would say, no, a man won't just rape. There must have been something that the woman did. So maybe it was her dress code. Maybe it was the time that she went out. She was at the wrong place at the wrong time. But the reality is that we know that, in fact, SGBV, rape in the Gambia is most common among minors, young people. We have several cases of 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds who are raped in their homes, on the streets. We have incidents of this.
Adults?
By adults, yes, by adults.
That's awful.
So that also reaffirms that actually all these perceptions that we have, it's the dress code, because you can't say that a 3-year-old dress code attracted someone to rape them. So these are all myths and misconceptions. And also they reinforce victim blaming. So we need to have those conversations, because I do believe that sexual violence is very, very common within our societies. But because of our culture of sutura, whenever these incidents happen, families are like, let's not talk about it, let's just keep it within the family. So these violations are not coming out as much as they should.
Could, sexual based violence, including, rape, be associated with mental illness? I mean, how can a man see a 5-year-old?
Yeah,
and want to rape them?
Of course, that is a pedophilia. If a grown up at that stage rapes a child, yes, possibly, because of course, as you've highlighted, it's unthinkable that a grown up would look at a little girl and rape them. But we also know that one thing that we are not talking about, it's also rape of little boys. We have that within our society as well. So sexual violence is everywhere within the society, and conversations like this is what we need to have, so that people acknowledge that this is existing and try to find solutions. And
your job must be very difficult, because some of the most influential people in our communities are the religious leaders.
Yes.
And, religion looks at certain things one way, different from the way the world looks at things. I am sure when you talk to religious leaders about, what happens in relationships, because marriages are all, relationships. And they give you maybe a religious interpretation of how men and women, should coexist in a, marital relationship. It may not always agree with your activism. So how do you handle, such situations?
Yes, I think, religion, in most cases, it depends on really interpretation, because I don't know any religion that condones violence of any form. So I think a lot of what we hear, a lot of the justifications that we hear based on religion are interpretation, and most of them are actually cultural, but not religion. But because in the Gambia, culture and religion are so embedded, it's difficult for people to separate the two. So, of course, again, religious leaders are very influential, as you said, in Gambian society. In fact, most cases when issues happen within our matrimonial homes, it's the religious leaders that are contacted. And of course, again, this culture of muñ, this culture of sutura, as a woman, you have to bear that pain. In fact, we all grew up hearing that a woman who goes through a difficult marriage would bear children who, we've all
who would be blessed,
who would be successful. I think all those messages are just reinforced so that women can stay in these violent relationships. But as I said earlier, violent relationships have consequences on the children, because they are watching and they would learn what they are watching. So you are passing on that culture of violence to the next generation. So, of course, but you will also find some religious leaders who would openly condemn violence against women or violence against any individual. So it just depends on the religious leader's school of thought, and it also requires continuous engagement with religious leaders so that they recognize the power they have. I'm sure they do, but also how do they use it positively to influence our society.
Okay. Engagement with religious leaders, no doubt. But what about schools?
Yes, key. Again, because school is where all our young people are. I think, again, our work and a lot of other civil society organizations are now targeting schools, going into schools, setting of school clubs, which is very much centered around educating young people about their rights and protection, but also how vulnerable they are, because our young people are very vulnerable. Nowadays, most young people get information from the media, from social media, which sometimes can be very unrealistic. So our engagement with schools is about empowering young people to be making the right decisions. You know, in the Gambia, when we talk about issues affecting youth, we talk about gender-based violence, but we also need to talk about the use of substances among the young population and how that is affecting youth's mental health as well. Because we are seeing all you have to do is just drive or walk around this highway, and you will see how our young people are struggling with mental health illnesses. And of course, I do acknowledge there are different factors that contribute to that, but we must also look at these social issues that are affecting our youth in educational sessions that we are doing. How can we incorporate these conversations within our curriculum? That is not just civil society organizations that come in a one-off or once a term to speak to young people, that these conversations are being held within the school environments, within our curriculum, to allow that conversation, because otherwise we are seeing the damage that this is creating. And I think that's another ticking bomb that we are not discussing as a nation.
So that realization is there. The question is, what is Will doing, to actually, practicalize it, make it happen?
Yeah, we've only recently just started with school engagement. We had a successful engagement over the last year where we engaged about 5 schools across the greater Banjul area, and we continue to engage those young people in different settings. So not just around SGBV. Of course, SGBV is one component, but we create professional advice. So for example, you are in grade 12. What do you want to do after grade 12? These are, career advice is another area that we are really not focusing on. So you will find the average young person who is in grade 12 and has never had that counseling where they sit with someone who can give them guidance as to what potential they have or what they could do in the future. So our youth engagement, especially in school, target those areas as well. We talk about those issues.
And these young women who are now coming forward and boldly speaking out about, cases of sexual and gender-based violence, what's the common denominator? Is it Western education? I mean, are you beginning to see women who've never been to school, Western-style schools anyway, speaking out against,
I think
sexual and
education certainly has a big role to play in that. And again, I appreciate the university that our university is producing excellent young people, and I think definitely the education plays a role, because it empowers women, it gives them the confidence, it gives them the knowledge and the understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think that is also playing a role in women speaking up, but also access to safe spaces. Like a lot of our women-led organizations now are going and providing safe spaces for young women to learn about themselves, about values, about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, about their bodies. And this is also helping women, and young women in particular, make certain informed choices, but also be bold enough to come out and have the voice to challenge those structures that have been for decades holding Gambian women back. So I think it's a mixture of different things, but whatever it is, we are pleased to see that happening.
And just to prove a point, when you go to communities where education is very low,
yes,
how difficult is it to be heard?
Yeah, you'll be surprised that in these communities, you find incredible Gambian women, some of them who've never been to school, but they are the smartest people I have met. at this community level. These women would talk about their rights. You would think that they've just graduated from
really?
Yes, Gambian women are very smart, whether formally educated or not. All it takes is for us to have conversations with the women within your own homes who have unfortunately not had access to formal education, but they are well aware. So we need to really piggyback on that and see how do we nurture that to help in the movement of our country in the way forward.
The past few years have been especially, great for you, receiving awards here and there. How have these awards impacted the work you are doing in the Gambia?
Yeah. So I think for me, the awards, it's usually not just recognition for me personally, but because everywhere that I'm awarded, particularly at the global level, I am referred to as a Gambian woman. So that is putting a spotlight on us as a country. So it's been great, but also it amplifies the work that I do. So for me, especially in the work on FGM, every time I am recognized as an activist, a women's rights advocate, particularly on the issue of FGM, you are amplifying the advocacy, and I do really appreciate that. And also, as I always say, I hope that also inspires other young women to see that it's important for young women to have role models. It was important for me. It definitely defined who I am today, and I hope that by these recognitions also I am setting that bar for other young Gambian women. So not just me personally, but also that it's setting the bar for other Gambian women.
And in terms of maybe helping with fundraising and even expansion of will,
yes,
capacity building and all of that, how has this helped?
Yes, absolutely. I think with the profile, of course, that also it's confidence. I already have a profile. People recognize the work I do. It's certainly easier now than 5 years ago, where I have to come and introduce myself and start all over. But these days, I do have to say that the work of will is being recognized globally. So it certainly makes things easier and access to support, whether funding or through the support of my team, but also using will as a name to bring funding for other organizations, because I believe very much that I can use my influence, my position to help other sister organizations, and I am trying to do that as much as possible.
There was a time when you were part of the Gambian diaspora. And of course, we know the contribution of Gambians in the diaspora to the economy of this country. But in terms of maybe, supporting the work of will, have you explored avenues, opportunities of working with Gambians outside this country to advance your cause?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. In fact, one of the things that will also does is offer internship. So we've had Gambians in the diaspora who've got children who are studying law or social work, who've sent their children to come and work with us because they want them to have practical experience in the country. So that it's one, they're bringing something to our organization, but we are also giving back. We've had at least 3 young women who came through that, and after that experience, they've all gone back, did their masters, and now, taking on other jobs, but taking a keen interest on addressing gender-based violence or going into human rights issues. So that's very much, but also our board members, part of our board members are people in the diaspora who have the skills on human rights or gender that are supporting us, both our board and advisors as well. So absolutely, we recognize the role of the diaspora. But also even in this post-transitional justice process that we are presently ongoing, one of the challenges that we have in the TJ is capacity. We saw that when the TRRC was ongoing, a lot of the people from the diaspora actually came, worked within the TRRC and supported the TRRC. And I think in the post-TRRC process, we should also explore how can diaspora continue to engage in this process. But importantly, we also know that there are victims in the diaspora. There are both direct victims, but also indirect victims. There are people that stayed in Europe or in the US for many years, not that because they were direct victims, but because of the environment that the authoritarian regime created, they couldn't come back and live in this country. But we, anywhere in this world, in these big institutions, global institutions, UN agencies, you will always find Gambians holding very senior positions. So we know that we don't lack the capacity. And we just need to encourage and make it conducive, because it's important for us to create a conducive environment that will attract Gambians with the skills to come back and support in this transitioning process that we are still on.
And what about will and international connections? Do you network with, sister organizations in Africa,
yes.
across the world?
Yes, we have other sister organizations working on transitional justice. So, for example, ICTJ, I actually started my work on transitional justice through ICTJ. We work closely with ICTJ. We work closely with the CSVR, which is the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation in South Africa. They are a leading organization on TJ. We work closely with the African AU-TJ forum as well. So we have those sister organizations, but also beyond the region here, internationally, we work with other organizations in Europe, in America, to support the work that we do on human rights.
I'm sure you've heard this not once, not twice, people complaining that the transitional justice process is just too slow.
Yeah.
I mean, they see no point in, continuing the process. And recently we had the Reparations Commission and all of that. How do you intend to work with the Reparations Commission?
I think, as a country, again, one thing, the Gambia transitional justice is, in the international community, is being sold as a model. Most countries that went through, for example, a Truth Commission, they didn't even produce a report. Even where they produced the report, it was never made public. Our TRRC produced a report. It was made public. The government accepted the recommendations through the white paper. There is an implementation plan, and things are moving. Of course, there is a lot of concern that the process is slow. And indeed, it is slow. It is a whole process, especially when you think about accountability and all those other processes. However, we are really pleased to see that the commissioners for the Reparations Commission have already been sworn in. In fact, just last week, they held a town hall meeting with victims to try to understand what their needs are. So we are seeing that things are moving forward. But of course, there are challenges, particularly with funding cuts. The government had promises, and we were really looking forward to the process going on. But of course, those challenges exist. As civil society organizations, we continue to engage with victims at the community level. We continue to bridge the gap, like the communication. Whatever we get from the Ministry of Justice or the government, we pass it on to victims and victim communities so that they know what is happening and we keep them in the loop. And of course, we continue advocating for victim-centered approaches and also for the participation of national stakeholders.
Fantastic. But we have to apologize for the disruption to this conversation. Due to power issues today, it's very unusual for these things to happen.
Okay.
But just finally, what might you have to say to the people listening to us, watching us this
thank
day?
you. Thank you so much for having me once again. I think for me, when the TRRC was ongoing, everybody was glued in the process. Every Gambian was following the TRRC process. And once the hearings ended, it looks like everything just went down, the energy, the interest. And we need to find, again, how can we get people's interest in the process? Because the TRRC recommendations, the implementations are everybody's business. It is a national it should be nationally led. And we as a country, as citizens, we are supposed to put the pressure on our government to implement the TRRC recommendation. So I do hope that, conversations like this would remind the Gambians of the fact that we still have this process ongoing, and we need to continue to advocate for victims to access justice, to access reparations, but also importantly, within our communities, there are communities that are still affected, that are still fragmented because of the violations that they experience, and we need to promote peace building and reconciliation within these communities.
Fatou, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Fatou Baldeh is the founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Women in Liberation and Leadership, known as WIL. It's Coffee Time with Peter Gomez.
Jar Oil, the company, have filling stations across the country, and our rates are relatively cheaper than anyone else across the country. Jar Oil is the biggest producer and distributor of cement in the country with the most competitive prices in the market.